This guide is the result of spending all my free time in the last 2 days playing Realm Royale. Let's go. Today we're talking about the Warrior class in Realm Royale. The Warrior class is the first class you will come across in the game because everyone starts as a warrior by default. So if you don't switch your class before the game begins, which happens to quite a lot of people sometimes, then you will end up as a warrior. So it's good to know how to play as that character and what perks that character has overall when you're playing Realm Royale. Coincidentally, the warrior is also a character that works very well for beginners. He's got a bit more of a safety net between his abilities, has some ways to heal up after a fight, but you can also go more aggressive with other abilities, so you have a lot of choices in how you play him. He's also a great team character, so really he's a good all-round character overall, which makes him a good choice for beginners. Let's start with the passive. The warrior's passive is gaining 5 health per second. With a base pool of 1200 health, it takes quite a while to actually heal up significant amounts with this, but it's a nice perk if after a fight you don't have any potions around. Aside of the warrior, there's only really one class that has a similar sustain passive, and that's the engineer, who gains 5 armor instead. This passive may sound very strong initially, but when you learn about items, then it's not quite as crazy. There is a way to get health per second for other classes too, and that's through higher tier breastplates. An epic breastplate will give you 5 HP per second, like the warrior passive, on top of the armor that it has, and a legendary breastplate will give you 15 HP per second. Nonetheless, those armor pieces won't always be around, they're not the easiest ones to get, and until you have them, the warrior passive is one of the very good ways to have a way of sustaining, and that's not the only sustain in this kit either. We'll talk about the legendary weapon a little bit later. Let's first go over the abilities. When it comes to the abilities, it's worth noting that as far as I was able to find out, the different levels or rarities of the abilities don't actually change the strength of the ability. So the leaps won't go further or the heals won't heal more, as far as I was able to find out. This may be wrong. I don't know for sure because there are no values attached to these abilities yet, so we can't tell. As far as I was able to find out, the only thing that changes by ranking up an ability is the cooldown. So the cooldown gets decreased the higher rank the ability is. That means it's not always necessarily the best idea to switch out an ability when you find another ability of a higher rank. Sometimes you just have an ability that works better for your playstyle or works better with a team, and you may want to keep a lower rank ability instead of a higher one. That's another one just because it has a shorter cooldown when you can't really make the same level of use of it. As like any other class, you start with one ability, and that is Heroic Leap. The description here is leap in incredible height and distance, and that's pretty much what it is. It's a forward leap that gets you quite a far distance towards a target that you're jumping towards, but it also puts you quite high in the air. Not as high as the engineer leap, which is basically just up into the air, but a fair bit more forward. You can chain this with your normal leap for even more distance, and it allows you to get to elevated places relatively easily. Some other classes have abilities that do that too. Other classes struggle a little bit more with that. With the warrior heroic leap, it's very easy. Now, this is obviously very good to close distances to enemies as well. It allows you to engage. If you're the frontliner for your team in a squad, then that's very helpful too. And if you're using a melee weapon, that helps too. The downside of this ability is that you're exposed for a very long time and your landing or your travel is very predictable. So if you're jumping up and an enemy sees you, they will have an easy time just shooting you while you're still in the air. And you have to be prepared for that. You can obviously try to shoot them as well, but it's usually easier for them when they know exactly where you're going to be moving. And that brings us to the abilities that you have to pick up first. The first one is Charge. Dash forward, dealing damage to enemies hit. The damage value is not specified here. It is 400 across all ranks as far as I was able to find out. This ability is obviously very strong if you're using closer range weapons, either melee weapons or shotguns or anything like that, as it allows you to get to enemies very quickly. It's also very good for your legendary weapon, which is the throwing axe. We'll get into that later, but that one is also better at shorter distances overall, and as such, being able to get this distance closed very quickly with a charge is very good. It can obviously be combined with Heroic Leap for even further distance closing, and this is where it comes in other ways as well. It is very good for mobility overall. If you're using your dash and your leap not for damage but just for movement, you can use them to quickly get to your allies or from one building to the other without being targetable for very long. So there are a lot of opportunities to utilize these two together, which I think especially in duos is very helpful. The next one is Flask of Healing. Throw a flask that heals allies. As far as I was able to find out, this heals 300 health. It doesn't heal the damage instantly though, it heals it over time. It also heals yourself, by the way, so it's not just for allies. So this is an AoE heal, and that in my opinion makes it almost core when playing in squads. It is such a good team heal that whenever a fight is going bad you can use it, or to sustain up in between after a fight it's very good. Or even just in a trade between an enemy and you and no one else, because it's still 300 health, it's still maybe an extra shot that you can survive that way. The next ability is Net Shot. Net Shot is interesting. The ability is throw a net reducing your target speed by, but we don't know by how much because that part of the text is unfortunately missing. This ability, as far as I was able to see, also deals damage, which it doesn't show in the description either. So I think it does 200 damage, unless I'm completely off on that. So you have this 200 damage ability that also slows. Now, this is obviously a very nice setup on paper, and it's nice especially if you're using a slower projectile weapon, like a crossbow or maybe the axe, or you want to close the distance to your enemy and melee them more. Now, the thing is that it's a bit in that. On one hand, you have that nice setup, but on the other hand, you have the relatively low damage from the ability itself when it hits, and also a very slow projectile it feels. It feels like it's very unreliable when you're chaining shots, and then you have this slower net in between. So maybe this is just my subjective feeling, but I overall felt like the net shot wasn't as effective as other abilities in many situations. I would personally prefer the charge if I want to close the distance to someone, because then I'm right in their face and don't have to close the distance afterwards anymore, giving them time to shoot me still while I'm walking up to them or jumping towards them or whatever. And at the same time the charge would also deal more damage. Plus, for team utility, once again, other abilities just generally feel better too. I would generally say I see the potential of this ability more in niche situations. For example, if you're playing a warrior in a duo with an assassin and the assassin gets set up for their headshots with a net shot. Then, last ability is the shielding potion. Throw a potion that shields allies. And the problem is it doesn't come with any values for this shielding. It's an AoE ability, it can shield yourself and allies. It is not actually buffing your own shield that you have on top of your health, but rather giving you a shield that shields your health. But it doesn't tell us anything about how much it actually shields. It may shield one shot, it may shield a certain amount of damage, or it may just make you damage immune for the duration of it, and I was not able to tell how much it actually is. I don't think it's a damage immunity completely, but really, I couldn't really figure it out. The lack of a value here really makes it hard to determine the overall value of the ability. But I can say that combined with the Flask of Healing, it basically gives you the maximum tankiness for squads possible. You can just drop your Flask of Healing and drop your Shielding Potion and everyone survives a lot more incoming damage, especially AoE damage. But, well, as the value doesn't even show up in-game, it's really hard to figure out how good this actually is. I would generally use this mostly in team setups with squads, and I would probably usually use this second to Flask of Healing, as Flask of Healing just allows you to take away damage taken after the fight as well and not just during the fight, unless I obviously get a significantly higher rank of Shielding Potion. The weapon of the warrior, the legendary weapon that you can build in the forge, is the Throwing Axe. The Throwing Axe has infinite shots, it doesn't need to be reloaded or anything, and it deals 800 damage per axe. It shoots with 0.9 shots per second. It has relatively slow projectile speed that way, and it also has a projectile drop-off. That means if you want to hit further away targets, you basically have to throw it into the sky, whereas in closer distance combat it is easier to hit, though at the same time the slow projectile speed also makes it a bit harder to hit if the enemy is very mobile. I don't think this is the best legendary weapon out there, I don't think it's the worst either. It takes a while to get used to the projectile though, which is a bit harder as you won't have that weapon all that often. There aren't really any comparable weapons before that. The one that I guess would somehow come closest would be the sword as a melee weapon, but that's still a completely different story. So as much as you would probably want to combine this with some sort of long-range weapon, I would not be opposed to the idea of combining this with a shotgun, just to make sure that you can get some quick shots in at close range and then try for the axes. So overall, the warrior is kind of a supportive, somewhat disrupting, distance closing class that way can also use swords better than most or close range weapons in general, shotguns and the axe itself, and is probably a very good class to start out into the game with. Due to the nature of their kit, I also think it's possible to utilize multiple warriors in a squad setting effectively, one focusing more on the shielding and the healing and the other one more on the aggression and dashing in and slowing enemies, so that's something worth keeping in mind. In the upcoming days I will obviously be making some light content, but I will also be continuing the guides for Realm Royale, so I will make other class guides and some weapon guides, armor guides and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that stuff, feel free to click the sub button and hit the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, thank you guys very much for watching and see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.